The mountains of Taraxis 4 loomed like silent beasts beneath the slate-colored sky. Their jagged edges clawed at the low-hanging clouds, and cold winds howled through the ravines with unsettling sharpness. The cadets, clad in reinforced climbing suits and oxygen-adaptive helmets, moved in a tight formation across the narrow ridge path. Below them, hundreds of feet down, a chasm swallowed light and sound alike. Every footstep had to be calculated, deliberate. One wrong move and gravity would claim another life. Logan Hart adjusted the tension of the climbing rope fastened to his belt, glancing back toward the larger figure just behind him. Ryalji, a cadet from the Threxian species, towering and broad-shouldered, his thick reptilian skin mottled with dark greens and reds. The Threxians were known for strength, not agility. Ryalji's breathing had grown heavier in the thinning air, and though he said nothing, Logan could see the tension in his eyes. The team had been on the move for over 6 hours. The training directive was clear: reach the high-altitude extraction beacon without artificial transport, using only natural terrain and resources. The mountains were unforgiving, and the real test wasn't speed. It was endurance, coordination, and survival instinct. The squad included 8 cadets from 6 species and 1 medic, Lieutenant Varel, a strict and by-the-book Zarin female with bioluminescent skin and a tone that brooked no argument. Logan had sensed something was about to go wrong even before it did. The cliffside had trembled briefly, a deep, almost imperceptible rumble that seemed to pass beneath his boots. He paused, turned, and opened his mouth to warn the others. That's when the ridge gave out beneath Ryalji. It happened fast. A thunderous crack echoed through the pass as a portion of the rocky ledge fractured and broke away. Ryalji shouted, a guttural cry of surprise as his massive frame dropped. The climbing line jerked violently, yanking Logan forward to his knees. The others shouted in their own languages, scrambling to brace and secure themselves. Logan's harness groaned under the tension as he fought to grip the icy stone. But the line snapped. Not the rope itself. The anchor pin lodged into the rock had torn loose with the chunk of the ridge. Ryalji's body vanished from view, tumbling down a slope littered with razor-sharp rocks and loose gravel. The impact was a sickening chorus of cracking limbs and metallic clinks as his equipment scattered. Dust rose in thick clouds, and then there was silence. Logan scrambled forward, ignoring the burning pain in his arms. He reached the ledge and peered down. The ravine dipped into a jagged basin about 30 feet below. There, sprawled awkwardly against a rock, lay Ryalji. He wasn't moving. "Visual on the fallen cadet," Logan called out through his comlink. "Ryalji is down. 30-foot drop. Possible spinal and leg trauma. He's alive, I think." Lieutenant Varel descended with surgical precision, her 4-limbed frame giving her advantage on the vertical slope. By the time she reached the fallen cadet, Logan was halfway down himself, using a backup line to rappel. The others stayed up top, observing in tense silence. Ryalji groaned weakly as the medic scanned his vitals with a handheld biosensor. His left leg was shattered, multiple fractures along the femur and tibia. Several ribs showed signs of trauma, and internal bleeding was likely. His pulse was shallow but stable. He blinked at Logan, pain evident in his eyes, but he said nothing. It was clear he was trying to remain composed. Varel examined the data in silence, her glowing fingers dancing across the scanner. After a long pause, she exhaled sharply. "He will not survive the climb or the remaining route. The storm front moves in within hours. Protocol requires we leave him with an emergency beacon and proceed." Logan turned to her, disbelief flashing across his face. "You're saying we just leave him here to die?" "I'm saying his survival probability is 8%. The weight of carrying him down or forward compromises the rest of the team. I am authorized to make the call." Her voice was clipped, cold, like steel. "I will administer stabilizers and attach the beacon. Extraction crew will retrieve the body or remains if weather permits." Logan stared at her, fists clenched. "He's not dead. Number. But he will be, if we delay any longer." The conversation ended there. Varel administered the stabilizers, injected nanites to slow internal bleeding, and activated the beacon near Ryalji's chest. Then she turned away and began ascending back to the ridge. The rest of the team followed. No one spoke. Logan lingered. He looked down at the massive figure lying broken against the rock. Ryalji's eyes were half-lidded, his breathing slow, but he was conscious. Logan crouched beside him, adjusting the loose blanket Varel had tossed over him. "Help? Not coming?" Ryalji whispered. Logan's jaw clenched. He wanted to lie, but he shook his head. Not yet, not fast enough. There was silence again. Only the wind moved, whispering through the canyon like a mournful ghost. Ryalji managed a pained grunt. Then, "Go!" Logan looked up toward the cliff, where the last of the team was vanishing into the mist. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the choice in front of him. This wasn't just about rules or percentages. It was about a living being, one who had marched beside him for days, who had shared rations, traded stories by the fire, and laughed awkwardly but earnestly at his jokes. Logan reached into his gear pouch and pulled out a strip of thermal fabric and some compressed plant gel. He tucked it into Ryalji's side, near the ribs. The alien winced, but didn't protest. Then Logan sat back on his heels and looked at the narrow path ahead. 10 miles of unstable terrain. Cold, thin air. A storm moving fast. One man carrying another 3 times his size. He exhaled. "I'm not leaving you," he said quietly. Ryalji blinked, unsure whether he misunderstood. Logan stood up. His voice grew firmer. "I don't care what the medic said. You're not dying on this mountain." And with that, he pulled out his emergency tool set and started cutting down saplings. Logan wiped sweat from his forehead, though the air was thin and cold. The tool in his hand, a compact survival blade, was already blunted at the edge from sawing through the fibrous saplings near the ravine's edge. He worked methodically, calculating angles, estimating weight, and remembering everything his grandfather had taught him during the wilderness camps back in northern Idaho. It had been years since he'd had to build anything without prefab components, but the muscle memory was still there, buried beneath academy protocol and simulation routines. The alien cadet lay motionless against the curved rock where Logan had left him. Ryalji's breathing had grown slower but steady. Logan didn't speak to him yet. Every ounce of his focus had to go into construction. Time wasn't a luxury, and with the storm crawling across the mountain range, he had only hours at most before the winds would make movement impossible. He found 3 long, straight branches with enough strength to support the weight of Ryalji's frame. Using his body weight and a fractured stone slab, he splintered the bases to make crude pegs, then began lashing them into a rectangular stretcher frame with tensioned rope stripped from his climbing harness. It wouldn't be elegant, but it didn't have to be. It only had to survive the journey. Next came the fabric. He stripped the thermal undersheet from his gear and doubled it over the frame, piercing holes through the corners to thread with vine fibers. The thick fabric could hold weight and keep Ryalji from slipping, even if the path forced Logan to drag at an angle. His hands were raw by the time he finished tying the last knot. Blood darkened the knuckles of his left hand where a shard had scraped him open, but he ignored the sting. He finally allowed himself to exhale and walked back to where the alien cadet lay, unmoving except for a slight flicker in the corner of his golden reptilian eye. Logan crouched down, gently placing a hand on Ryalji's shoulder. "I built a carrier. We're moving," he said quietly. Ryalji didn't respond at first. Then, in a voice so low it barely registered, he said, "You should not stay." Logan shook his head, already sliding his arms beneath the cadet's torso. "We already settled that. Don't waste breath trying again." When Logan attempted to lift him, he immediately felt the brutal reality of the task ahead. Ryalji's body was dense with muscle and plated bone, typical of Threxian physiology. He shifted his stance, wedging his shoulder beneath the alien's back and tilting him sideways onto the sled. Every movement elicited a pained groan from Ralji, but the cadet made no attempt to resist. He simply clenched his sharp teeth and bore it in silence. Once Logan had secured him with two tight straps, one across the chest and one across the thighs, he stepped back and surveyed the stretcher. It looked fragile compared to the body it carried, but the structure held. "All right," Logan muttered. 10 miles. Let's not think about that number." He gripped the handles, braced his legs, and pulled. The first tug was a battle of physics. The sled barely shifted. Logan repositioned himself, using a combination of leverage and a backward march to coax the stretcher forward. The path up the ravine was a narrow, uneven incline, riddled with broken rocks and loose gravel. His boots slipped more than once as he slowly carved a zigzag trail upward, dragging Ralji 1 strained meter at a time. Once they reached the top of the basin, Logan allowed himself a brief pause. He dropped to one knee, lungs burning, heart thundering. The sky above had turned a sickly greenish hue, the storm clouds bloated and angry. The mountain's edge ahead offered no clear path, just a rocky slope that twisted into mist. The trail the rest of the cadets had taken was already vanishing in the shifting dust and debris. Behind him, Ralji stirred slightly. "Still with me?" Logan turned, nodded once. "Still here." "And I'm not changing my mind." He didn't wait for a reply. He stood, took hold of the stretcher's leads, and began moving again. Progress was slow, excruciatingly so. Every 100 meters felt like a mile. Logan had to stop often, not because of weakness, but because the terrain demanded it. He navigated narrow ledges, lifted the front end over obstacles, and once had to backtrack 20 meters after realizing the ground ahead had collapsed into a sinkhole. By the third hour, his muscles burned with a deep ache, and the storm winds had begun sweeping across the lower ridges, bringing with them freezing sprays of ice shards. He used one of his jackets to cover Ralji's upper torso and wrapped a heat strip around the cadet's midsection, praying the temperature inside the stretcher wasn't dropping too fast. The alien stirred again, this time with more urgency. "You cannot keep this pace. You will collapse." Logan didn't stop. "I'll rest when I have to. But I'm not dropping you on this rock and waiting for a storm to bury us both." "I would not blame you," Ralji murmured. "No one would." Logan's jaw clenched. "That's the problem. Everyone accepts that it's okay to leave someone behind if the math says it makes sense. I don't. That makes me the idiot in this situation, I guess." Silence followed. Only the whistle of the wind and the steady rasp of boots over stone filled the air. By late afternoon, Logan found temporary shelter under a jagged outcropping shaped like the rib of some ancient beast. The natural curve created a sloped alcove, protected on 3 sides. He maneuvered the stretcher beneath it and sat beside Ralji, finally allowing his shoulders to sag. He opened his ration pack, broke off a protein bar, and pressed it into Ralji's hand. "Chew slowly. You need the energy." Ralji blinked. "I do not require Earth sustenance." "You do now," Logan said. The alien complied, barely managing a few bites before exhaustion overtook him again. Logan, meanwhile, chewed his own half in silence, watching the sky. The storm front was closer than he'd estimated. The winds had shifted, and the clouds moved unnaturally fast, coiling like serpents around the distant peaks. Logan reached for his emergency thermal shield, activated the heat field, and spread it over the stretcher. A soft hum filled the alcove as the invisible layer stabilized the temperature just above freezing. As night approached, Logan leaned against the inner wall of the shelter and closed his eyes for 5 minutes at a time, never longer. Any sign of movement from Ralji, any change in breathing, jolted him back to awareness. In those fragmented minutes of rest, memories surfaced uninvited. His mother's voice reading stories about ancient explorers, his grandfather's laughter under the stars, The sound of rescue helicopters after that one winter expedition gone wrong. He had survived before. He would again. But this time, he wasn't alone. And that changed everything. A low rumble stirred Logan from his shallow rest. He blinked, muscles stiff and eyelids heavy, as he registered the sound again. It wasn't thunder. It was closer. The deep, rhythmic growl of wind forcing itself between stone walls and narrow canyons. The temperature had dropped further despite the thermal shield, and frost clung to the edges of his boots. He sat upright, brushing condensation from his jacket collar, then turned toward the stretcher. Raoul G was still breathing, but his skin had taken on a gray-green pallor, and his breath emerged in short, erratic bursts. Logan reached forward, placed 2 fingers against the alien's throat, and felt for the pulse. It was weaker than before. The cold had begun to penetrate the insulation. He tightened the heat band around Raoul G's chest and added a second one from his backup kit. There was no time left. The storm had arrived. Outside the shelter, a wall of fog had crept over the path. Icy flakes drifted through the air, some harmless, others sharp-edged like frozen glass. Logan stood, tested his legs, and felt them protest with a fire born from the previous day's effort. He ignored the pain and began disassembling the thermal shield. It had served its purpose. Now, every second counted. He gripped the stretcher's handles once again, braced his feet against the slope, and began pulling. The terrain ahead was narrower, littered with jagged stones and slick with melting frost. The air howled in his ears, making every breath a struggle, every step a trial. He wrapped one of Raoul G's discarded belts around his waist and looped it through the stretcher's frame to shift some of the burden onto his core. It helped, slightly. The path curled around a ledge that offered little protection from the wind. As Logan inched forward, his boots lost traction. He dropped to his knees, catching the stretcher before it slid backward, and forced himself upright again. The wind screamed louder, snow fell sideways, the light dimmed into a sickly gray. He kept moving. Time became meaningless. There was no sun to track, no sound but the shrieking gale and the crunch of boots over stone. Logan's mind entered a mechanical rhythm. Pull, breathe, shift, brace, pull again. When pain came, he acknowledged it and moved on. When his hands trembled from the cold, he wrapped them in cloth. When his knees buckled, he paused just long enough to breathe, then rose again. A sudden gust hit him broadside, nearly throwing him off balance. The stretcher skidded, and he scrambled to stop it from careening off the ledge. Raoul G groaned faintly, the first sound from him in hours. Logan turned quickly, checked the restraints, and crouched low beside him. "I've got you," he said, his voice hoarse. "You're not going anywhere without me." Raoul G opened his eyes just enough to look at him. "Fire," he whispered. "Too cold." Logan nodded. A fire. He needed to stop, to make heat. But there was no dry kindling, no cover from the wind. His eyes scanned the path until he spotted a natural alcove between 2 boulders, barely big enough for the stretcher, but it would have to do. He dragged Raoul G inside and began gathering what he could find. Dried moss, splinters of bark, even old lichen scraped from the rock face. He emptied a chemical ignition capsule from his med kit and doused the makeshift pile. One strike of the flint was enough. Flame caught, hissed, and crackled into life. Logan held his hands over it, then guided the heat toward Raoul G's chest, lifting the jacket slightly to warm his core directly. The alien's body twitched under the warmth, and for a moment, Logan saw his chest rise more deeply. It wasn't much, but it was life. As the fire burned, Logan tore a strip from his own sleeve and used it to wipe the condensation from Raoul G's face. His own fingers were nearly numb. He sat beside the flame, shielding it with his body, and allowed himself 10 minutes. No more. The storm howled just beyond the rocks, rattling the narrow gap like a warning. After the fire burned low, Logan packed the embers into a sealed thermal pouch and placed it under the stretcher's base to provide residual heat. Then he stood, gripped the handles again, and pushed forward. The terrain shifted. The narrow path gave way to a steep incline filled with scree, loose gravel and fragments of shale that slipped with every step. Dragging the stretcher upward required all his strength. He leaned into the harness, using his back, hips, and thighs, inching forward in a low crouch. More than once, the sled jerked and began sliding backward, forcing him to jam his heels into the gravel and grit his teeth. By now, his arms had gone numb from effort. His thighs felt like stone. Every breath scraped through his throat like glass. But ahead, through the fog, he could make out the faint red flash of a beacon post, one of the old navigation markers left behind by the academy. That meant he was at least halfway. He clung to that thought. Then the wind changed direction. A shrill whistle cut through the silence. Logan turned instinctively. Too late. A sheet of ice from the cliff above dislodged, crashing down beside him with explosive force. Shards sprayed across the path. The impact knocked him sideways, and he tumbled to the ground. The stretcher skidded into the rock wall with a metallic thud. He scrambled upright, eyes searching frantically. Ralji hadn't fallen, but one of the belts had snapped. Logan dropped beside him and checked his condition. The alien was still breathing, but the jolt had reopened a wound along his side. Blood, darker than human blood, thick and sluggish, oozed from beneath the blanket. Logan cursed under his breath. He pulled a sealant patch from his kit and pressed it over the wound. It adhered instantly, forming a gel barrier. Then he doubled the remaining strap, tying it tight to keep Ralji in place. He didn't speak this time. No encouragement, no promises. He just moved. The wind began to howl again, louder than before, bending even the narrow shrubs that clung to the cliff. Logan pulled the sled up another rise, and another, each one harder than the last. The beacon post came closer, then vanished behind swirling mist. At one point, the path narrowed into a blade of rock barely wider than the stretcher. Logan stared at it, chest heaving, then turned and dragged the sled backward, guiding the stretcher's width across the ledge with a combination of careful shifts and calculated weight distribution. One wrong step and it would have gone over, but it didn't. He made it across. Eventually, the storm gave way to quiet. The wind still moved, but gentler now. The snow turned to fine mist, and the rocks beneath his feet grew warmer with geothermal steam. Logan realized he had reached the lower ridge, the halfway point marked by heat vents and natural vapor. He found a ledge shielded by stone and collapsed beside the stretcher, arms draped across the side. His body refused to move anymore. He laid there for a full minute before he rolled to his side and looked at Ralji. The alien was awake. His eyes, still fogged with pain, focused slowly on Logan's face. "You still here?" Ralji rasped. Logan smiled faintly. Always. And then, before either could say more, a sound pierced the fog, a long, low growl vibrating through the stone beneath them. Logan's heart sank as he turned toward the mist and saw the silhouettes forming in the distance. Something had caught their scent, and it was coming. The growl rumbled again, low and menacing, vibrating not just through the ground but into Logan's bones. He rose slowly, every muscle resisting the movement after hours of relentless labor, but his instincts pushed him upright. The mist on the ridge curled and shifted ahead, revealing faint silhouettes, four-legged, sinewy, low to the ground. The shapes stalked forward in absolute silence now, their earlier warning growl replaced by that eerie stillness predators used when they knew they already had the advantage. Logan stepped between the stretcher and the mist, heart hammering. His hand reached for the survival spear strapped to the side of his pack. A composite shaft with a sharpened alloy tip, compact but durable. He had no delusions about it being a match against wild Tyraxian predators. especially not in his condition. He tightened his grip anyway. Behind him, Ralji stirred. His voice, hoarse but aware, whispered, "Graksh." Logan didn't turn around. "What are Graksh?" Ralji answered slowly, each word pained. "Pack hunters. Sharp bone jaws. Skin. Resistant to most blades. They wait for weakness. Then strike." That confirmation settled like lead in Logan's chest. The Graksh didn't need to rush. They had found two half-broken bodies in the fog and now circled patiently, waiting for exhaustion to finish what time and terrain had started. Logan stepped forward into the mist, trying to gauge their position. The first one appeared suddenly, close, too close, its eyes glinting with a faint yellow sheen. The creature's body was long and muscular, covered in segmented black armor that pulsed as it breathed. Its head was wedge-shaped, and its mouth slowly opened to reveal two serrated rows of inner bone ridges that shimmered like wet glass. Logan didn't hesitate. He jabbed the spear forward, not to kill, but to create distance. The Graksh flinched backward, but not far. It was testing him. Another growl sounded to the left. Logan turned just in time to see the second one advancing. His back was to the stretcher, and the realization that he couldn't defend both directions at once was like ice down his spine. He shifted, placing his feet wider for balance, his spear between the two threats. "Think," he muttered under his breath. "Don't panic. Think." He remembered something from the training manual, not from the academy, but from one of the Terran survival books he had read as a teenager. Certain predatory species, especially those that hunted in packs, responded not only to fear, but to sound, not cries, rhythm. He reached into his belt pouch and pulled out the emergency flare canister. He didn't ignite it. Instead, he used the base of the spear to knock it against the stone surface beside him. Once, twice, 3 times. A harsh metallic clang echoed through the mist. The predators froze. For a second, there was only stillness again. He hit the rock again, then again. The sound repeated, uneven, loud, unsettling in the quiet mountain pass. The nearest Graksh growled in confusion and backed a step away. That was all Logan needed. He seized the moment, sprinting forward, hurling the flare canister toward the creatures, then slamming the spear into the ground between them. It bought a heartbeat of space. He rushed back to the stretcher, dropped beside Ralji, and hissed, "You still awake?" Ralji's eyes flicked open. "Can you lift your arm?" The alien tried. His right arm twitched, but couldn't rise. Logan didn't waste time. He pulled the flare cap, igniting it with a loud pop and brilliant burst of red-orange light. He jammed the flare upright into a crevice above them, so it would cast wide shadows along the walls. The predators snarled, their dark outlines flickering under the glare. They didn't flee, but they hesitated. "Let's go," Logan muttered, hooking himself once more into the belt he'd fashioned around the stretcher. He dragged. The Graksh began to follow. Slowly. Silently. Each footfall from Logan was an act of stubborn will. His legs screamed, his lungs burned with every gasp of the thin, cold air. Behind him, the flare dimmed. Ahead, the trail narrowed again. The ridge now sloped toward a shallow valley where geothermal streams hissed from the stone. He aimed for the left path. The rocks there were more stable and surrounded by low shrubs. One of the Graksh darted forward, claws scraping stone, but stopped when Logan turned to face it again with his spear raised. This one was braver. Logan hurled a piece of torn metal gear, a broken sensor plate, toward its head. The Graksh blinked and ducked, retreating into the fog. "Just follow me." "Stay curious, not hungry," Logan whispered through his teeth. Ralji stirred again behind him. "They'll not leave. Not until we're out of scent range." Logan didn't respond. He knew that already. For the next hour, the Graksh shadowed them. Sometimes Logan saw them clearly, sometimes only caught glimpses. A glinting claw, a twitch of a tail, a low growl that vibrated the air. Once, he thought he heard more than 2. He didn't look to confirm. When the flare died completely, he moved faster. He found a narrow bend between two steaming rocks, where the air smelled of sulfur and scorched minerals. He remembered the Academy briefing on Graksh. Sulfurous environments disrupted their nasal tracking and disoriented their echolocation. He turned sharply and pulled the sled into the crevice. Ralji's body barely fit. Logan covered the stretcher in a synthetic heat blanket and sprayed the air around them with odor-masking vapor from his med kit. The Graksh hated the scent of synthetic antiseptics. It made them back off, sometimes. He crouched low behind a boulder, spear in hand, and waited. He counted the seconds in his head, breathing slow. Then he saw them again. 2 of them. One sniffed the air, stopped just shy of the crevice, and snarled. The other moved to flank. Logan remained motionless. Then the wind shifted. Steam from the geothermal vent surged forward, coating the path with thick vapor. The Graksh froze. One of them wheezed, an odd sound, almost like a sneeze, and bolted into the fog. The second followed. Logan remained still for 5 more minutes. Only when the mist began to clear and no shapes re-emerged did he exhale. He returned to the stretcher, pulling the heat blanket aside. Ralji's eyes opened slowly, unfocused. Gone, the alien rasped. Gone, Logan said. Ralji's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Still, not leaving me? Logan crouched beside him, brushing snow off the edge of the frame. Even if monsters come out of the mist? Still not leaving. Ralji nodded once, slowly. Then I will not die today. Logan stood, refastened the straps, and looked out over the clearing. The ridgeline curved east now. Beyond it, somewhere over the horizon, was the extraction point. He was still alive. Ralji was still breathing. The Graksh had lost the trail, and the mountain had one more path left to give. Logan stepped out of the sulphurous mist as the sun finally pierced through the heavy clouds above. Pale golden light washed over the upper ridge, stretching long shadows across the stone. The storm had moved east, and for the first time in 2 days the mountain exhaled into silence. No wind, no predators. Just the raw stillness of high-altitude air and the crunch of his boots dragging the stretcher forward. His legs no longer shook. They simply obeyed. Pain had become background noise, drowned by purpose. Ralji lay wrapped in the layered coverings, barely moving, but his eyes remained open. His voice had faded, but his presence held. Logan checked the pulse again. Still slow, still there. It was enough. The final stretch to the extraction zone was the cruelest. The trail curved around a plateau marked with yellow Academy flags, but a rockfall had destroyed the path. The new route ran beneath the cliffs, across a slope of uneven boulders and fractured ledges. Logan couldn't pull the stretcher across it. It would tip, or worse, slide into the ravine below. He stood at the edge, calculating. He could see the landing beacon half a mile ahead, pulsing a steady blue light atop a metal tower. That beacon meant safety. It meant the Academy medevac would arrive soon, but first he had to carry the stretcher. Not drag, not slide, but carry. He bent down beside Ralji and looked into his eyes. "I'm going to lift you now. It's going to hurt." Ralji blinked once, slowly. "Do it." Logan slid the ropes under the stretcher, tied the ends across his chest and shoulders, and secured the base against his spine using 2 reinforced belts. Then, with a breath pulled from the deepest part of his lungs, he began to lift. His legs nearly gave out. The weight was brutal, raw, and crushing, but he didn't let his knees fold. He steadied, found balance, and took the first step onto the broken slope. Gravel shifted under his boots. His body leaned forward. He adjusted, found a new center of gravity, and kept moving. Each step was agony, a contest of mind against muscle. The sun above blurred in his vision. His breathing turned into hoarse gasps. Blood from his cracked palms seeped into the ropes. But still, he walked. Once, he stumbled. His right knee slammed into the stone and the stretcher slid against his spine. He screamed, not in fear, but in fury. He dropped to one hand, repositioned his footing, and pushed himself back up. The path ahead was uneven, but it sloped upward now, the final climb. At the summit, Logan saw the flat circle of the extraction point. The beacon light pulsed slow and steady. A signal drone hovered above it, scanning for movement. He stumbled toward it, dragging his feet, one step at a time. The moment his boots touched the edge of the beacon's platform, the drone shifted, focused on him, and sent an acknowledgement ping. "Extraction confirmed," a robotic voice said from the drone's speaker. "Medical vessel approaching. Stand by." Logan didn't stand by. He dropped to his knees, unhooked the stretcher, and lowered Ra'alji onto the platform with shaking arms. He removed the blanket, exposing the cadet's face to the sun. "You made it," Logan whispered. "We both did." Ra'alji's lips moved slightly, the words barely registered. "Because you carried me." Logan nodded and collapsed beside him, his body finally giving in. He laid on his back, staring at the sky as the sound of distant thrusters grew louder. The medevac ship burst through the clouds. A silver-gray shuttle with blue medical markings and retractable landing gear. It touched down beside the beacon with the grace of a feather. The side hatch opened, and a team of medics descended. One of them, a tall man with dark hair and a breath mask, knelt beside Logan. "You brought him in alone?" Logan didn't answer. He only nodded once, chest heaving. "Where's the rest of your unit?" the medic asked. "Gone ahead," Logan said, barely audible. Two others began scanning Ra'alji. One gasped. "Multiple fractures, internal bleeding, stabilizers are holding, vitals are fragile but present. We're losing time." They lifted Ra'alji onto a floating gurney and activated the biocapsule. The transparent shield sealed around him, injecting sedatives and regenerative nanogel. His face relaxed. As the shuttle door closed behind the team, Logan sat against the wall, shivering. The adrenaline was gone. Only the cold remained. He wasn't sure if he would stay conscious long enough to take off his boots. His hands no longer felt like part of his body, but he was smiling. When the ship lifted off and flew toward the horizon, a camera on the exterior caught an image of the platform. One human, one stretcher, one story that would ripple far beyond the mountain. 2 days later, back at the Taraxis Academy Infirmary, Logan sat on a medical bed wrapped in recovery gel sheets. His ribs were bruised, 2 fingers fractured, and the skin on his palms looked like sandpaper. But he was upright, eating protein mash from a tray with one hand while staring at the monitor in front of him. The door opened. Lieutenant Varel entered. Her expression was unreadable, glowing lines across her temples faintly pulsing. "He survived," she said. Logan looked up. "I know. You carried him 10 miles through lethal terrain," she continued. "You disobeyed protocol. I know that too. You had no support, no visibility. You were stalked by Graksh. You should be dead." Logan took another bite of mash and shrugged. Guess the odds were wrong. Varel stood in silence for a moment, then approached. She handed him a data pad. "What's this?" he asked. "A commendation and a copy of the updated training manual. Cadets will now study your route as part of the Endurance Survival Module. It will be called the Heart Protocol." Logan stared at the words. His name, in official print. He didn't know what to say. Varel turned to leave but paused at the door. "When Ra'alji wakes, he'll be moved to recovery. He asked that you be informed." Logan set the pad aside. "Tell him I'll stop by." She nodded once and left. A week later, Ra'alji sat upright in his bed, a monitor clipped to his arm and soft pulse readings echoing in the room. Logan entered quietly, holding 2 cups of warm broth. "You're alive," Logan said. Ra'alji gave a slow smile. "You look worse." Logan laughed. That's because you didn't have to carry me? Ralji reached for the cup, his arm still shaky. Why? Logan leaned back in the chair. Because you were still breathing. That was reason enough. Ralji nodded slowly, sipped, and looked out the window. My people, do not honor weakness. If I had been left behind, none would have questioned it. But now I return as one who was carried, and I find that not dishonorable, but humbling. Logan didn't respond. He didn't need to. Outside, the Taraxis whines blew across the academy rooftops. Inside, 2 cadets, one human, one Threxian, sat in silence, bound not by orders or species or rank, but by something deeper. Something earned on stone, in blood, and beneath fog thick with death. One had refused to leave, the other had refused to die, and together they had changed what survival meant. Forever.